go to bread and butter. Bread and butter being the economy, the budget. The finance minister was in the House Parliament, that is 2 days ago on Thursday, and he presented a media budget review. As I've said already, he did something that many people didn't expect. Somebody said, within the context of COVID and the economy struggling and attempting to recover, you definitely needed more money to stimulate the economy. And so we were expecting that he was going to go there and ask for more money, but he didn't. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And can he really stay within what he'd already asked for in the 2021 budget? Was he being populist? We'll discuss that. And to do that, joining me right now is Dr. John Kumah. He's a Deputy Minister for Finance, MP for Jusu. I believe he's joining us on Zoom. Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafo is a Senior Lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana. Professor Godfrey Bokwing is a Professor of Finance and Economist at the University of Ghana too. Dr. Theo Champon, Economist and Political Risk Analyst, also joining us via Zoom. A lot of profs and doctors or economists and etc. joining us. But I want to keep it simple. This is about Banku and Kinki. No more, no less. Let's have that conversation. Prof. Bokwing, you are with me in the studio. Let me start with that basic position of the finance minister going, because traditionally we've become accustomed to our finance ministers going, use the media by the review to go and say, I need more money, right? And then first he goes there and says, listen, I don't want more money. I don't need more taxes. I'm just coming to update you. And I'm going to tell you that I'm going to stay within my 2021 budget that I came for. Did that surprise you, first of all?
Well, I wasn't surprised.
You weren't?
Yes, we had said before that we needed to be moderate. Once you have a clear understanding of the economy, the challenges we are going through, and given the negative comments about our debt buildup, and the fact that our domestic revenue envelope has not responded the way we expected to all the tax measures from the policy perspective, from the administrative perspective, government itself found itself in a certain moral constraint angle from asking for more money to spend, which probably would increase our debt stock and all of that. So the fact that government is unable to generate a lot more money, we have already ramped up a huge deficit in the 2021 budget. That itself is having a telling effect on government resource allocation, because practically, if you look at 2021, we are just living from hand to mouth. We just generate enough to cater for wages and salaries, compensation, gratuities, and then interest payment. There's nothing practically left for anything else. That itself is crowding our priority spending. So you want to be very careful. And
so the finance didn't have a choice?
No, they didn't have a choice.
Okay, stay with me. I'll come to
But as somebody would say, the only choice they will have will be, well, open the cap, go borrow a little bit more, and live with the consequences.
Yeah, we'll come to borrowing too, because that's who is has consequences you mentioned. Yeah. Stay with me. I'll come to that. Let me go to Priscilla. Priscilla, what's your position on that? Did that surprise you? And by the way, the next question then becomes: is that realistic to expect that between now and December we won't spend beyond what we approved in the 2021 budget?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Evans, and good morning to the cherished listeners. To some extent, yes, based on what we are used to, we know that most of the times budget reviews are accompanied by supplementary budgets. But indeed, this is an indication, from my perspective, that, for example, either we are getting better at planning and forecasting, because indeed, if you are using accurate models to generate your revenue and expenditure handles within the economy, barring any significant negative impact in the economy in the form of significant drop in inflows that will affect your revenue handle, a pandemic or other unanticipated effects, you don't expect that your numbers will change. So the whole idea of we being in a pattern of always raising supplementary budgets within the mid-year review was something that we needed to have a look at. And indeed, in the 2021 budget, as we've discussed earlier, The minister was quite clear, laid out all the what they needed to do in raising taxes and all that. So I believe that from where they sit and within the whole framework of tight fiscal framework and ballooning debt to GDP ratio, I mean, they are being quite cautious and it's in the right direction.
Okay, that's your champion. So quite cautious, the right direction, but was it the realistic option? Was the finance minister simply being populist on the day? Because as the minority has suggested, we can bet, as they say, that end of year, he will spend far more than we approved in the 2021 budget. Was this a realistic option?
I think it was a realistic option. I mean, what is without doubt is that the 2022 budget, the numbers will go up and there'll be more spending. But we need to put things in the context, as my other two panelists have said, that you've got a big deficit situation where you're spending almost 15%, a debt to 15% of your GDP as a deficit, and you've got almost 80%, public debt to address. So in that case, it was always going to be difficult to actually come back and ask, for more financing. But I think to the credit of the government, when you also look into the numbers, there's an interesting story there that what they had projected to spend on the revenue side and what they spend also on to collect on revenue and spend on expenditure, you see a compensatory effect, right? So for example, for the first 6 months of the year, they had programmed to spend 32 billion. They ended up spending 28 billion provisionally on the revenues to collect on the revenue side. And then when you look at the expenditure side of the equation, again, they are projected to spend 55 billion. They spent a little under 51 billion. So you begin to see that even in terms of balancing the books, when the revenues underperform, there has been some compensatory effect on the expenditure side of the equation. And that tells me that the policy actions that were taken, at least at this stage, were right. But what, in my view, is clearly without that is that in the 2022 budget, the numbers will go up.
So, final question on this, and then we'll go to some of the key issues. How confident are you that between now and December, we'll actually stay within the 2021 approved spending budget?
The biggest headwind or challenge we got now is if we have another pandemic hitting us, so there's talk of a third wave, and we've seen signs of that in Ghana. But if we have that increasing across the board without the vaccinations, etc., going, and that has a big impact on economic activity, then for sure, most of these numbers would pretty much be out of the blue, because government then will need to borrow more to sustain the economy going forward. So I think that's the really biggest hurdle that we've got to address between now and November or December of this year.
Confident or skeptical that we'll stay within our means?
I think between now and December we will stay.
Okay.
But the caveat is if you have a major third wave in the country, then we'll definitely have to spend more money.
Priscilla, confident or skeptical that we'll stay within our means as the Finance Minister has promised on Thursday?
Definitely. I think Theo has outlined it. If we have a third wave, we cannot afford, we have to save lives. So it means that the budget will be thrown, put aside, and then attend to the immediate issues, which will be trying to contain the virus and all that, which all the mitigating measures have negative important effects on the economy. So really, at this point, what we would have to do is to keep to the protocols and hope that we don't go through any strong third wave as is happening elsewhere.
Prof, you agree that the two colleagues say the only factor that may shift us beyond the promise of staying within our means will be a third wave. I mean, we know there's a third wave now, right?
Because we are still in the pandemic.
We are still there. I mean,
but beyond that, if there are internal pressures in terms of unsatisfactory performance, in terms of how the citizens view the government, like fix the country and the pressures and all of that, we're also talking about security concerns with our neighbors and all of that. this could also trigger government to respond to those expectations. But you see, government is containing expenditure largely in order to balance. So what we are doing now is balancing the books, basic accounting, balancing the books. Okay, so we don't want to hurt anybody. But does government have enough room to introduce additional taxes in addition to what we're containing?
Clearly no.
The answer is no.
Yeah.
The answer is no. So, and the point is that once the government is also not spending to stimulate growth, that is also going to have implications. Because the issue is that we've seen some recovery, but how job rich is that recovery? How does that recovery meet the expectations and undo the negative effect of the pandemic?
I mean, the Deputy Finance Minister is on, joins us, Dr. John Kumar. So, Mr. Kumar, so tell me, this announcement that you're not going to ask for more money, was it imposed on you by reality? Or, you simply decided that is a prudent thing to do, although we could have actually gone for more?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh goodness, we have a challenge with your line. Let's hope that we could get a stable.
Morning to your listeners.
Great. Okay, sorry, we have a challenge with your connection. We will try and fix that. Okay, so let's go to some of the specifics. What was the biggest takeaway for you from the media budget review, Prof?
Well, really, government kept to 8 budget in 2021, so there's no takeaway from the media review.
Okay, so
whatever we needed to know, we're contained in the 2021 budget.
So there was no surprises, there was nothing.
The government is keeping to 8 targets and all of that. We know that we need to do some fiscal consolidation. We need to contain our debt build up and all of that. Okay, so if you look at a lot of the things, they are, should I say, good intentions, but we don't have the fiscal space to be able to translate those good intentions into actual. And it's down to money. So once government revenue remains dwarfed, it's going to affect government's ability to spend probably in the area of health the way it should, in the area of education the way it should, and maybe social protection the way it should. Because it's down to just that. We don't have money. So we don't have money to do any kind of stimulus. We don't have money in terms of to implement specific policies that would engineer job-rich recovery. We don't have that. And we are also concerned at the macro level about containing our debt. The discussion all over is about our debt. It may not be so much in terms of the debt to GDP ratio, even if it's 80%. Because baseline, it tells you how hard would it be to pay off all of our debt with 1 year's output. But there's no requirement in our law that we should pay off all our debt with 1 year's output, because we borrow against future cash flow. But you want to go beyond the debt to GDP ratio and look at the other effect of the debt buildup. And the other effect, you look at your interest to revenue ratio, and you realize that the huge interest payment on the debt is crowding out priority spending. Okay, so until you are able to increase your revenue envelope, contain your debt, you won't have enough fiscal space to be able to do interventions and implement them the way you want to do. Because if you look at the numbers that we have, anything major government would want to do today, then it means that the government has to go and borrow. It's as simple as that.
Interesting. So John Kumar is back on. John, I lost you briefly, but you attempted to answer the question whether your decision not to ask for more money, whether that was imposed on you by reality.
Yes, we needed to send it is the objective of government to state it clearly that we wanted to stay within the fiscal discipline or the fiscal consolidation agenda of government. If you have noticed, the Fiscal Responsibility Act has been suspended, and the idea is to be able to come to the threshold of 5% by 2024. So not asking for supplementary budget is one of the strongest indications that government is prepared to stay to fiscal discipline. So that's one. Two is to also not try to burden the already difficult COVID-induced environment with any new measures in the form of taxes or any kind of measures that could bring extra hardship to the people, because COVID has already imported certain level of hardship, like now the cost of freight has gone up and several other things that makes it difficult for government to be able to introduce any new measures in this difficult time. So we didn't want to. Government wanted to show empathy and understanding to the people. Thirdly was to be firm on the problem of the youth unemployment and create hope on job creation. And so government has set a target to create about 1 million jobs in the next medium term, starting from now. And when we say we are creating jobs, we are talking about both the public sector and the private sector. So now government has already started giving out financial clearance in various institutions to start recruitment. And the priority of choice is also on the NAPCO personnel to be able to make them permanent in various institutions. And whilst we do that, we also want to create a more enabling environment for entrepreneurs and young people who are starting business to be able to secure sustainable funding arrangements and all that. So these were the three strong objectives that we wanted to send out with the mid-year budget statement.
Let's stay with the last point you made, and I think that's a big line item for a lot of people who listen to the budget. Was it jobs?
Okay.
Was it jobs? Was it jobs? So the biggest line in there for many people, because the biggest problem we have in the youth. Let's stay with that. How do you, coming back from the conversation we've just had about you not asking for more money, Prof in the studio had said the fiscal space is too tight. You don't have options. If you want to do anything, you have to borrow. And we know that there too, you have a problem with your debt ratios being unsustainable. So explain to the masses that you claim you want to create the jobs for, how you plan to create all these jobs in the midst of all the difficulties that you yourself have articulated right now in terms of funding.
The question of choice, let's understand that governments always have choices. As to whether it will be a good choice or a better choice, it's only a question of judgment. But I can tell you the objective of government is what I've put out, to stay disciplined within the fiscal framework. And the idea of financing the job creation agenda that we have put out, you remember in the 2021 budget, we spoke about the Obatampa Cares program, which is the revitalization agenda of government to restore the economy to productive ways. So it's a 100 billion facility project where government is raising 70 billion cedis from the private sector and 30 billion cedis through government arrangement. And the job creation basically is anchored on the Obatampa Cares. So government is talking about a program like UBank, which is just a new product being introduced within the commercial banks. So you are creating a new banking arrangement where young people with business ideas could go to any bank in Ghana across the country, where they are treated on different terms, not on commercial terms. So they can borrow without collateral, and the interest rate could be lowered for them in terms of payment, also made more flexible. So that is one. And also, we are seeking to sign a compact, youth compact. Under the Obatampa Cares, beyond the budgetary allocation for certain ministries, we have selected 8 extra ministries to receive extra funding. So we've signed a compact with Ministry of Agriculture, we've signed a compact with the Ministry of Tourism, Trade and Industry, and several others. So we are now going to sign a youth compact with a focus on job creation. And that is the extra funding we are going to receive to support the 1 million jobs we want to create. At the moment, we are seeking to have an interministerial committee with focus on youth agenda. So the Ministry of Youth and Sports, Ministry of Labor and Employment, and then the Minister for Lands and Industry has also designed a project called the Alternative Livelihood Support Program for Galancers. That is targeting about 500,000 youth. We are using the NEIP program to focus on startups, especially graduates and those in our universities who want to start their own businesses. We are looking at the NBSSI, which is now the Ghana Enterprises Agency, to also reach out to women and SMEs. So all these interventions, by the time you put them together in the next 3 years, and remember the 1 million is for 3 years, so the component that is for the rest of the 6 months left for this year is already budgeted for in the 2021 budget. And so in 2022, we'll be able to find another allocation for the program, and then we'll be able to get there.
Let me get my panelists to assess the details you've just given us on how you're creating the job. Dr. Tuya Champon, let me start with you. Give me an assessment of what the details we just had there and how government intends to create the 1 million jobs within the current tight fiscal space they have.
Space. If you look at most of the numbers and the projections, there's no way they would be able to do this without adding on to the debt. So if you look at the latest IMF Article 4 release that came out on the 20th of June, there's a table in there that has some financial indicators with projections, but they're actually projecting that by 2022, the public debt would have gone up to about 84.9%. So, I mean, what this tells me, and like Prof said, it's not so much a question of the debt per se, but we have to then link it to the efficiency of spending, which is where a lot of us have had some issues and concerns, in the past. So most times governments come out with a lot of these nice programs and nice interventions, but the clarity that you need in terms of how they're actually going to implement this, that's one. But number two, how you measure and track benchmarks or progress across time, often that seems to be the missing link. And then third point for me is the connection in terms of all these interventions to, for example, our wider industrial policy and strategy vis-a-vis things like the Continental Free Trade Area. These things require some higher level policy coordination. I'm happy he talks about this interministerial committee, etc. But it comes back for me to really the most important point not being money per se, because you can still go and borrow to finance those development outcomes. And Batampa, they talk about 30-70, so 70% of the financing coming from the private sector and 30% coming from the public. But I think the really important conversation in all of this is, getting into the nitty-gritty details around efficiency of spending and connecting these to the wider developmental outcome. Because even, the issue of the youth unemployment that we've got in the country, when you look at the data over the last 5 or so years, there is deepening inequality. And the IMF even, again, makes reference to this in their the statement that they issued a couple of days ago, that whereas growth in Ghana slowed in 2020 to 0.4% from 6.5% in 2019, food prices spiked, and this is the point I want to highlight, and poverty increased. So this is where I think most of the interventions that government is making, although they are good on paper, we need to really get down into the nitty-gritties in terms of connecting these to wider outcomes and then how you track that over time.
Dr. Chumesi Boafo, where do you stand on this?
Great. I think job creation is critical because it is through employment that people's livelihoods are improved. So indeed, when you look at the numbers in there, I see that government is trying to, in this scenario, trying to look at entrepreneurship, promote entrepreneurship activity across board so that employment will be generated. But when you look at the data, and one thing I need to point out is that any employment strategy in the country that is trying to solve unemployment problem, that comes directly by absorbing the unemployed into the public sector in one way or the other, means that you are solving one problem, but you create another, because we know that based on domestic revenue, our domestic revenue is basically used to pay wages and salaries, statutory payments, and interest payments. The rest, in terms of capital expenditure and all that, we depend on grants and borrowing to do that. So for me, any attempt at job creation that is coming by tapping into the resource in the private sector, is critical. Because when you look at the data, for example, in terms of population, employment to population ratio, we find that in the country still, Employment is not changing. The structure of the economy really is not changing. And that is why revenue mobilization is still a major challenge at this point. Why is that? Because when you look at it, the public sector is employing about 7%. The private sector, which is supposed to be the engine of growth, is also employing about 8 to 9%. The rest of the people are in the informal sector, and we know that the majority of the people in the informal sector do not pay direct taxes, income taxes. And we need the revenue to be able to develop. So that is why consistently we find that we have a challenge with our budgets. And until a conscious effort is made to generate decent employment where people are able to make contributions towards the national cake in the form of payment of taxes through, for example, formalization of the economy and creating decent jobs, we will always be going around in circles.
I mean, Prof, so we got these details a short while ago. I mean, do you agree with Tuachampa when he says there's no way they can do this without adding on to the debt?
You know what? Government is right, and that is good intention. We'll create jobs, 1 million jobs in the next 3 years. Look, we have been hearing that for a long time now. Check 2014 budget, check 2015 budget, 2016 budget, 2017, 2018. You will see who is tracking those numbers. If we were able to translate those, because all the things captured in the budget, baseline, they are good intentions. They are not accomplishment. And we cannot substitute good intentions for accomplishment.
You raised a very important point that if all the job promises in the last decade
they would have been
achieved, we won't have any unemployment in Ghana.
And the reason is that, not that I'm blaming government, the reality in terms of the constraint, the budget rigidity, makes it practically impossible to translate that good intention into actual in a more sustainable, measurable, that you can even see. That's the issue. So the question is, you want to create 1 million jobs. What are the channels of transmission? How do we measure it? Because you must direct spending in those critical subsectors of the economy that would inure to job-rich economic recovery. And in fact, you mentioned something. When you understand the effect of the pandemic, it's a pandemic of inequality. It magnifies the existing vulnerabilities in our society, particularly inequality. The haves and the have-not. So if you look at the data from Ghana Statistical Service in terms of job losses, okay, reduced wage hours and all of that, that tells you, it typifies inequality. So any recovery we are looking at today must be a recovery that seeks to undo that effect and create a just society. You saw what happened in South Africa, right? Okay, to a large extent, that is the effect of inequality. Okay, we are talking about a country where out of 10 graduates, it's only 3 that are likely to get a job. Okay, and if you look at the data in Ghana, the reason we are all passionate about job creation, because we are sitting on a time bomb. Unemployment is high among university graduates between 22 and 29. In other words, we are using the productive aspect of our life, the youth, to look for jobs that do not exist. Okay, so if we talk about all these things and we don't back it with concrete strategy, with the necessary financial resources, people will still finish their universities and still go out there and will be unemployed, regardless of whether they study job creation in the university or employment.
He gave us some specifics on the question you asked about what are the vehicles you're using to deliver. He said something that struck me. They're setting up a youth bank, and he broke that down. He says they're having a relationship with banks, all banks, where once this is implemented, a young man can approach a bank and he or she can borrow without collateral and at low interest rates. And then there's a public sector angle where agric, lands and natural resources are all being taxed to develop youth-specific projects with incentives for them. But let's start with the first bit, the first line of the private sector bank's intervention. Borrowing without collateral. That will definitely create a lot of jobs for young people.
Hold on. Look, we have heard these things. It's good. government will have to work hard and try to borrow below the interest rate. What will be that interest rate? Which are these NGOs? Banks that tries on grace and will lend with no collateral below the market interest rate. Beyond that, remember, interest rate is not the only factor in the production mix to create jobs. We are talking about a certain enabling environment cutting across policy, regulation, and markets and all of that. Okay, so it's good that we are talking about these interventions. But look at the credit situation in Ghana and look at where credit is going right now, because banks are rational economic agents, baseline, and all of that. So certainly government will have to come in. If we are not careful, we do some of these things, then it ends up with some kind of default, it ends up with certain kind of debt that ultimately the state will have to absorb. So if you look, so and that is why I think on one breath, maybe it was a good signal that the government says that they are not going to, they are not coming out of with a supplementary budget that will require borrowing, because that will mean that they are going to compete with the private sector for the limited credit in there. But if you look at the credit dynamics right now, banks are comfortable making investment in government bills. They have become more risk averse, okay, because of the COVID. Okay, so they will do their analysis and look at where credit should go to and where there's greater protection from perceived defaults. They will do all of that. But we are talking about the linkages, and I think Tio talked about that, beyond a certain framework that says that this fits into this, this fits into this, this fits into this. And then we talk about the job creation. Beyond that, you know, no country has ever developed solely on the strength of SMEs, baseline entrepreneurs. We must be intentional about supporting domestic private sector, regardless of their political affiliations. We have to, as a country. And we have to do all of this, and I'm sure government is aware, and government is doing that. We have to do this within a certain context now of AFCFTA. So we are talking about one big market. That's huge opportunity. 1.3 billion people, over $3 trillion in terms of GDP. That's huge. Then it means that we have to be able to create the necessary framework, condition framework that enables the Ghanaian private sector to be that competitive, to take advantage of that. But I don't think we are there now. And if we talk about enabling environment, in our mind, what is it that constitutes enabling environment? At what rate should that youth entrepreneur borrow to make him competitive, to undo the other challenges in the economy?
Let me bring back John Kumar. John, I want to return to the specific about the initiatives that will deliver the jobs, and to the point about the banks lending to young people without collateral and low interest rate. What incentive will a private bank have in a country like Ghana to lend to a young man without collateral and at, you know, low interest rates?
Yeah, thank you. And you know, government has already an existing model under the One District, One Factory, where the government is able to have an arrangement with the banks to absorb a percentage of the interest rate. And that serves as a motivation for banks to give out loans to existing entrepreneurs who want to take advantage of government policy of One District, One Factory. So in a similar vein, first of all, the banks stand to gain from, you know, getting new crop of customers who are young people, who are ambitious and have the vision and determination to grow their businesses. And, you know, government is taking part of the risk in terms of guaranteeing or assuring the banks that the government is prepared. Please, can you hear me?
Sorry, I can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. So government, the presence of government as a backup for these interventions gives a lot of assurance to the bank. And the other incentive is that these numbers that we are trying to prepare to enter into the entrepreneurship space and create economic opportunities and jobs for the youth, it's a potential future customers for these banks. So I strongly believe that even as part of their corporate social responsibility, some of the banks will even be willing to support government in achieving this laudable objective.
Dr. Chua Champon, are you as optimistic as the Deputy Finance Minister on this subject of the private banks? Remember, the Obatampa 100 billion, 70 billion of that is private sector. So I'm assuming that if you want to quantify, this part of it will be part of the 70 billion. So in that, back to the question, are you as optimistic as the Deputy Finance Minister that the banks, one, through corporate social responsibility and through incentives that government will give, are willing to make all these adjustments to create these jobs for the young people?
On incentives, yes. On CSR, I don't think so, because the banks, as Prof said, they are rational economic agents. But I think the other thing that maybe is a positive here in all of this is also, the Development Bank Ghana concept or model that is also being touted in the budget statement. And then there's also two other things that they talk about. They talk about venture capital financing for SMEs under the Ghana Cares program. And then there's the Ghana Enterprises Agency, which is meant to promote the development of Ghanaian MSMEs. So they're all well and good. Of course, there's some details that some of us would expect, but to be fair to government, as Prof said, the intentions are well and good. Also, we need to recognize that often there's a lag between when you introduce these interventions and when you begin to see the effect of that at the kind of wider macro level, including even things like the domestic revenue mobilization with the whole digitalization agenda. So coming back to your question, I think, we are yet to see how this would look like or how this would translate into outcomes 3 years down the line, and whether or not those 1 million jobs would have been created. But certainly the vehicles to do that, some of them are there. Others, in my view, could be strengthened. And it goes back to some of the points, that some of us have been making around creating linkages and finding those productive sectors in the economy that we have some advantage that we can actually champion and support. So here I'm talking, for example, within the ICT space, within the tourism space, within the horticultural space. And these are places or environments where you can have the potential for high productivity, for agglomeration, and potentially you can have that catalytic impact on creating jobs as well. So I have a mixed view on that, but I think we just have to give a bit of credit to the government in terms of the interventions and intention behind it, but they need to be coordinated, because if you look at our economic history, most of the time we've had certain interventions like this being introduced. You can go back to budgets in the 70s and 80s, and you see something similar being attempted to introduce. But it comes to the policy mistakes and the missteps that have been made, and that joined up, thinking in terms of connecting these to wider developmental outcomes.
I mean, John Kuma also addressed this point for me. Dr. Chua Champon had earlier said that there's no way you can do what you're proposing to do in creating the jobs without adding on to the debt stock. Do you agree?
Like I have already told you, these projections have been made within the fiscal framework that is already projected for 2021. And like I told you, don't confuse the figures of the IMF with the central reporting of our deficit by the central government. They are using general government reporting, so their figures tend to be high. They add contingent liabilities and other costs that tend to increase those things. So, but if you stick to government deficit reporting of 13.9% in 2020, we are saying that in 2021, we are going to maintain a deficit of 9.5% of our GDP. Then we expect to go down further in 2022 to maybe 7% or below And then by 2023, 2024, we should hit the fiscal responsibility threshold of 5%. So we are mindful of these fiscal targets, and we are not going to add on unless it fits within the framework. So, and also, don't forget, to be able to achieve that, we need to increase our revenues. And because that is so key and central to your debt filing in terms of, so when you said the primary balance is the net accumulation of your debt. One of the effective ways to be able to overcome your debt levels is to increase your revenue. The government is also introducing a number of interventions. Apart from the digitalization agenda, we have just introduced the Ghana.gov, and we are seeking to also align the Ghana card to all the 10 numbers of our country, which will automatically shoot the taxpayers level from 3 million, those captured from 3 million to about 17 million to population immediately. And then also the digitalization has helped us to identify about 60,000 professionals in Ghana who do not pay tax. So we are introducing the Revenue Assurance, Compliance and Enforcement, called the RAISE program, which will now help government through the digitalization effort to identify every Ghanaian and how your expenditures and incomes are made and what revenues you pay to government. So the lawyers and engineers and doctors and all the professionals who earn a living, but because it's voluntary, they don't pay, we will now be more proactive in reaching out to this category of people. In essence, we are trying to say that we are working hard to improve on revenues. And when we are able to achieve a higher revenue target, then you don't need to be worried so much about your debt levels, because you see, even though the IMF commented that Ghana is financially distressed, they added that the capacity of Ghana to repay its debt is adequate. It means that we have the capacity. We just have to ensure that the financial framework that we have, we are able to stick to it, and then we will be able to achieve good results for Ghana.
Okay, just for clarity, before I bring in Professor Bokwing and then I hear from Dr. Chimesia, are you clarifying that as far as government is concerned, the target is to realize these 1 million jobs in the next 3 years without adding on to our debt stock?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
That's the clarity. Yes.
Well, that's going to be very difficult. And I'm sure it's going to get a year down the line. It's going to be like multiple choice. Government will say, yeah, we created 1 million jobs. And where is it? And another entity or minority will say, no, it's not like that. Okay, so I think we cannot run away from the reality. And I think there's no point denying it also that we are in a fix also because of COVID, and also because of how we walked into COVID because of the energy sector crisis and the explicit debt formation from there, and then the financial sector. I believe that any government would want to fix our roads, build hospitals, schools, furnish it if they had money. Okay, if they had money. If the president had money, they would do all that we are asking for. The reason they are unable to translate this into actual, year in, year out, you see it across all the budgets, is down to one thing: there's no money. And in our attempt to go beyond our means will result in debt formation. And that is what I believe that the media review tries to do, or to avoid that. You know what, let's stay within the budget. So if you say that now you want to create 1 million jobs, and maybe you are announcing this in the media review, but it's not coming with any additional money and all of that. If you look at Obatampa, how much will be mobilized from private sector? Is it coming? How much is supposed to come from government? Is it coming the way it should? And all of that. We are not there yet. Okay, and if you look at the recovery, we still have to be a bit conscious, because if you look at the IMF economic outlook, the recovery is predicated on the assumption of greater vaccination. In the advanced country, they are doing well. So far, they have achieved 40% in terms of vaccination. The emerging market have achieved 11%. Low-income developing countries are doing 1% or less. So that has implication for recovery. Okay, in the second half. Thankfully, if you look at Ghana, I must also admit that if you look at the approach with which government adopted in responding to COVID-19, I think it's been very good. And we can't take that away from them. If you look at the system they have put in place that made us attractive to getting the vaccines, the first batch, and the fact that we are being told by the end of the year we'll get this and all of that, that is quite good. Okay, so it's going to take a while. So I think my message will be that we need to be very conscious. We need to be moderate. And our greatest hope in doing all that government has talked about, actually, does not lie with extra borrowing much, but it lies more in terms of our ability to increase our domestic revenue mobilization. We need to do that. And when we say we need to do that, we are not overstretching the point. Because if you look at Ghana, even with the level of informality, compared to our peers with similar challenges, they are doing far better than Ghana is doing in terms of our tax effort. In other words, our tax scaled by our GDP, we are doing less than 13%. Our peers are doing between 18 and 20%. So that gap alone could be closed to our advantage without burdening the faithful few. So there's room. And here it's not more of the policy level, it's more of the compliance and administrative level. So which means that we need to enhance greater compliance. And I'm happy government is talking about digitization and all of that. Okay, so the theoretical benefit of all of that have been talked about. Now we need to get to work and do it this way. And once government is going after every cedi that the state thinks that is in your pocket, that same state must be efficient with how it utilizes the resources. Other than that, the citizen will come at them.
I mean, Dr. Chimesi, now we've had clarity from the Deputy Finance Minister that they intend to create all these jobs without adding to the debt stock. I mean, give me your quick reaction to that.
Like I indicated, this basically was a review of our performance so far based on the 2021 budget that was read in March. So I'm not surprised that is their anticipation. And indeed, when you look at it, it appears that at this point, the employment generation is going to go through the Ghana Cares of Atampa program, which is seeking to raise significant revenue from the private sector in the form of domestic and foreign direct investment. So indeed, when you look at this, I think that in the employment generation area, one thing that is lacking is for us to harmonize all the activities that are going on in there. Because you tend to find that a lot of agencies are doing a number of things. So, for example, you have the Youth Employment Agency, you have the Ghana Enterprise Agency that is lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. You have Maslock, and now there is another that is coming on board. We need to have a harmonious program that is looking at youth employment. And for every activity that government is engaging, I think that we should be intentional about the number of jobs that are created within that activity. So when you look at it, it's focusing on light manufacturing, for example, agro-processing, and pharmaceuticals, among others. I mean, the opportunity exists within these areas for significant job creation. And when you look at, for example, agro-processing and light manufacturing, the kinds of jobs that are created, you are not looking at sophisticated skills. You are looking at people with medium to low skills who can gain gainful employment within these areas. So I think that that is one thing we need to look at. And on the revenue generation aspects, in terms of how do we mobilize enough revenue, indeed, like the other panelists have indicated, we are still underperforming in terms of our tax to GDP ratio. Other economies are doing better. The evidence points to the fact that, for instance, digitization and mechanization are key indicators that will significantly reduce the leakages that are in the system. I know of a study that has looked at the impact of, for example, giving simple tablets to tax collection agents in the area of property taxes. And that has led to significant improvements in the revenues that are generated. I think it increased by about 70%. So there is a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of the revenue that we are generating domestically in the area of tax revenue. And then at this point, I also think that we need to also take a second look about our non-tax revenue. What is happening in terms of the proceeds that we're getting from our natural resources? Because Ghana is a natural resource-rich nation. And so at the end, when our resources are exploited, how much goes to us as a country? When you look at the data, for example, we see that Ghana currently does about 4% of GDP in terms of the revenue that comes from natural resources. Botswana, for example, is doing about 18% of its GDP from the exploitation of diamonds. So I think that we need to have a second look, because in the area of tax revenue mobilization through taxes, it is taking time. And indeed, in terms of formalization of the informal sector and all these initiatives, they are medium to long-term impacts that we anticipate. But in the meantime, what are we doing really? And these are some of the discussions that we need to have to get good value for money, because our environment, for example, are depleted because of exploitation. What comes to us as a country? And these are options. And we know that countries have developed by the exploitation of natural resources through diligent contract and others that make them get enough revenue from their resources.
I want to take a quick break on this. When we return, we will wrap up on the budget, but of course on Newsfile for today. And I'll pick quick comment. There are two quick things in the media budget review that also came up from many people's commentary. The question about wages was a key thing for people. We now have aggrieved public sector workers saying, listen, I think they said 4%. It's too small. But in the budget, but the finance minister was clear that, listen, we did agree on the new minimum wage with Labour, the tripartite committee, and it was based on a general consensus that government cannot pay what we do not have. And some of the workers have taken offense to that and said the 4% is too small, and there's some agitation. We'll get comments on that, because government will still have to bear a huge part of the burden. It's what they pay for wages and salaries. And I will end by a brief comment on the finance minister also chose to include in the budget a comment on the National Cathedral and asked that you contribute 100 cedis to it. I'll ask the quick thoughts of my panelists on that as we wrap up, just on the small matter of the National Cathedral that was in the budget. Remember that Newsfile is always brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashasa University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert and Sons, seeing is believing. We lead, home is where one starts from. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. DBS Industries, CIMA, helping people and businesses to succeed. We'll be right back.
Repeat, I'm not here today to ask for more money. I have not come. Mr. Speaker, I'm not here today to ask for more money. I have not come to ask for more taxes. I have come to update the House on the performance of the economy for the first half year of 2021 and our plans for the unexpired term of the year, consistent with Section 28 of the PFM Act.
So that is the finance minister there on the floor of Parliament on Thursday. Let's wrap up now in the next 10 minutes. And I want to quickly give a quick line to Dr. Kuma, who is, of course, the Deputy Finance Minister, on this big question about wages. So the Finance Minister, when he spoke, reserved a bit of the first part to address Labour. And he was clear that the new minimum wage that had been agreed at the tripartite committee level was one that was agreed because there was an understanding that government cannot pay what he has, what it doesn't have, and that productivity is important. Some workers have taken offense at that. They believe you gave them 4% increase, and yet you gave yourself far more than that, and yet you make the point about you don't have money. How do you address that? Because you need these workers in this course of the next few months for the big question of productivity, right? And so address the concerns that we've had the workers express about the comments of the finance minister in the media budget review that you cannot share what you don't have.
Yes. So let me put this in perspective. You remember we were coming from 2020 COVID, where many workers were home, but yet government had to pay their wages throughout the whole year. And I think that the leadership of the labor unions reciprocated that good gesture in this negotiation in terms of accepting to take what was agreed upon. But most importantly, the finance minister's comment comes in the area of what the Ghana situation is. At the moment, 56% of our domestic revenue goes into wages and salaries of 740,000 workers on the payroll. So if you look at it, we are spending 56%. In fact, our regional average is about 38% within the ECOWAS sub-rate. And in Ghana, we are spending as much as 56% of our domestic revenues to be able to take care of 740,000 on the wage bill. So this is what the finance minister is speaking in terms of productivity. We will be able to do more. If we are able to do more, we can give more to workers. Even if it's 50% and productivity is high, we'll be able to give more to workers. But if you have less productivity, you can even give 60-70% of all that you have, and it will still not be satisfactory to the workers. So it was not to spite them, but to explain the situation to them that we all have to increase our productivity and efficiency so that we can give more to workers in Ghana. This is what he meant.
Dr. Priscilla Chumesi Bafo, when the finance minister made that comment that we cannot share what we do not have, and that what we've agreed for wages for workers is all you're getting, he was simply stating facts. I mean, he was being factual, was he not?
Indeed, you cannot share what you don't have. But I believe that sometimes in issues like this, a lot of emotion come to play. So, but the reality of the matter is that when we talk about remuneration or reward for labor, productivity is critical. And it to a large extent also influences the competitiveness of the nation. Are firms able to produce and sell at market rates in other countries, or is it that our cost of production is too high? So when you talk about public sector wage, so just like the Deputy Minister indicated, a lot of our domestic resources are going into the payment of salaries and wages of public sector workers. And that is why, for me, any attempt at solving unemployment challenges in the country by loading on more people onto the public sector wage bill is really not a sustainable way of trying to solve the challenges that we have. But that said, we also know that indeed workers are concerned about the nominal wage, but the real value of the wage they take home is also critical in terms of how much you are able to afford. And when you look at the inflation rates, in recent times we haven't done badly. And the expectation is that given that we have been in a pandemic, which has significantly affected production in the country, this is probably the time that we should all tighten our belt and contribute to lift ourselves out. But that said, when we see people in authority being ostentatious, people in authority not living by the examples that they are supposed to, then indeed workers will be up in arms and demand what is due them. So it's more like a chicken and egg situation here. But for competitiveness of the country, particularly for the private sector, in order not to unduly burden the whole idea of paying higher wages, because it serves as a signal, particularly with the minimum wage for those in the formal sector. So any significant increase also has an impact on the cost of production, and that also has an impact on prices. So if you are not careful and wages are not matched by productivity increases, it could only be inflationary, and at the end of the day, you find that workers will be worse off it is. But I mean, what is due everybody ought to go to them. And in that case, particularly with the public sector, how do we even measure that productivity? That is also a question, because you cannot just throw it up in the air like that and say that, yes, maybe people are not being productive. Are there supervision that is taking place? Are there expected outputs that are targets that are given to people to satisfy at certain specific time? If not, really, it is said that people do not do things that you do not supervise, really. So that would be my take on that.
I mean, Dr. Theo Champon, 56%, I heard the Deputy Finance Minister say, of the revenue that we make as a country go to pay wages and salaries. And so, and that is clearly unsustainable, but it's been like that for so long. It's grown and grown and grown. I mean, government is doing enough, right, for workers?
It's interesting. See, if you go back to look at a number of the structural adjustment programs from the 80s, you see the same narrative or story, which is that we want to reform the public service, money goes in, but the outcome is that productivity of labor, particularly the public sector in Ghana, and this is a fact, you can see it in a number of studies, one is very low, but at the same time we keep, increasing the numbers in terms of people that we're employing. And I get that as where, the public service is coming from. Because the other side to the equation is that you also see the political class as, to borrow Dr. Chumesi's words, living ostentatiously, things like MPs loans, V8, etc. So there's a bit of a narrative, a perception issue there, that in one breath you say we should tighten our belt, but in another one to, here you are spending money that is not due you. But the fact of the situation is that we're spending, in my view, far too much in terms of compensating labor without an adequate response in terms of, the productivity gap. And then on the revenue things, two quick things that I think can be done. We need to quickly pass the tax exemptions bill. It's still been sitting in before the House. We need to address the issues of transfer pricing in the extractive space. And on digitalization, we've done some work, and there's almost an 8% of GDP opportunity. If you translate that into quantum terms, we can actually generate as much of 25 billion or 5 billion extra USD of revenues every year in this country without having to go and borrow unnecessarily, which adds to the public debt stock.
Prof, your quick comment on this wages matter.
Well, certainly Labour would want more in the presence of all that is going on. But the question is, do we have the space to absorb that? That is the issue. But if you look at the statistics, it's not extraordinary. It's just because we are not generating sufficient tax revenue in relation to the size of our economy, that would have made this percentage he quoted look a bit small and created some space for other priority spending or even to scale up in terms of wage payment. But if you talk about productivity and all of that, that is for the employer to solve. Of course,
which is government.
Which is government, working with labor. Because the reality on the ground, and I do agree with what Dr. Priscilla and Theo said. Look, an inefficient public sector represents cost to the private sector as they interact with the public sector, and they contribute to the high productive cost base of doing business in Ghana. And all of that adds together to make us a bit uncompetitive. And it's going to, if we are not careful, that would affect our ability to maximize the opportunities from the AFCFTA. Because the gains from the AFCFTA relies largely on a competitive private sector. So we need to address that. So I think government needs to look at that, look at productivity. How do we measure it? How do we track it? Do we have job description for every public sector worker? And all of that. We need to do that. We can do that if we want to, because other countries have done that. Until we fix that, it's going to have implications for the private sector and private sector competitiveness. Okay, so we need to look at that. Then also, in fact, somebody told me that, look, the only way to solve this wage problem is to make every public sector worker Article 71 holder. So
that's a good one.
so that tells you that, I mean, in the face of all of these things, I mean, cost of living is rising.
Yeah.
Okay, even though inflation has come down, it's coming down. It doesn't suggest that prices are coming down. Prices are going up at a reduced rate. But of course, the basket doesn't measure everything.
Yeah.
And all of that. So I believe that there are real concerns that government will have to sit down with labor. And I think government will just have to be truthful. Sometimes the truth hurts.
Yeah.
I believe that the minister put it clearly. That
Yeah.
we can't give what we don't have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you can't save somebody if you you understand.
Right, the truth hurts.
But government must lead by example. If you're asking everybody to tighten their belt and you don't have a belt on at all, then it's going to be very difficult.
That's a good one.
And all of that. So
listen, I need to wrap up in the next 30 seconds. In the media review, very quick comment. Finance Minister says, let's back the drive to raise funds for the cathedral. Have you contributed 100 cedis?
I just sent 200 Ghana cedis right
Oh, goodness
now,
me.
and I'm going to continue.
Okay, well, so that's your position on that, and I'm sure the Finance Minister and government will say thank you very much, and the trustees.
I'm looking
as well.
forward to it completion.
Theo, have you sent your 100 cedis?
He should send
I'm
pounds.
more than happy to contribute. I think we need to build a built environment and develop our cultural heritage, and I'll be happy to contribute.
Yes, the Deputy Minister.
Yes, in fact, it's grateful to those who are contributing. Is the minimum, and trust me, those who are not interested, they shouldn't worry. It's not to every Ghanaian. It's not compulsory. It's voluntary. But we believe that in the end, Ghana stands to gain hugely for this project. Thank you.
Professor Chubesi Bafo, are you 100 cedis gone yet?
I think it's a personal choice that I would like to keep to myself, but overall, it will add to our infrastructure in the country. So indeed,
okay.
Yeah, but I haven't, and I'd rather keep it to myself.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Grateful that you joined us. Listen, enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you're traveling, please be safe on the roads. Next week, Samson's going to be back, and I can bet you I'll be watching him from the comfort of my bed.